Okay, so part 3 in the study, I like to look at the Targum Jonathan and a little closer. And the Targum Jonathan is an Aramaic and Rabbinic translation of the book of Isaiah, and therefore it's a very valuable resource for continuing to study the book of Isaiah. Also look at the Rabbinic texts to see what the rabbis have to say, how they interpret these scriptures, and how they weave together their narratives, so we can kind of draw out some additional points that are quite interesting to look at. So let's look at the Targum Jonathan and see what it has to, Jonathan, how he translates the Isaiah text. Okay, so here it says, "Descend and sit in the dust, O kingdom of the congregation of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne of glory, O kingdom of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Receive this calamity and go into servitude. Put away the glory of thy kingdom. Thy princes are overthrown. The people of thy armies are scattered. They have vanished away like waters of the river. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered. Thy shame shall be seen. I will take full vengeance on thee, and I will change thy judgment from the children of men. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel." We note that Jonathan translates this verbatim, "And sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O glory of the kingdoms of Chaldeans. Thou shalt no more be called the mighty one of the kingdoms. I was angry with my people. I have polluted my inheritance and given them into thine hand. Thou hast not had compassion," right? There it is. "And upon them thou didst make my dominion, or thy dominion over the ancient, very cruel." Okay. "And thou said, I shall be the mighty one of kingdoms, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the end of them. Therefore hear now this, O voluptuous one that dwellest in secret, that saith in her heart, I am, and there is none else besides me. I shall not sit a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children." Okay, so when we're looking at the Aramaic translation, there are several differences between the Hebrew and the Aramaic translations on these verses. We obviously can see that there is a lot more content, right, than compared to the Hebrew Bible over here, right? In verse 1, in verse 2, and verse 3, there's all, modifications that Jonathan made to the text. The Aramaic translation here emphasizes the humiliation and the punishment of the kingdom of Babylon, whereas the Hebrew text focuses more on the physical actions of the woman that represents Babylon. So the Aramaic translation does not mention the imagery, such as millstones and grinding, to convey the idea of punishing and suffering like what we see in the Hebrew Bible. And the Aramaic translation speaks of sitting in the dust and of the princes and the peoples being overthrown and scattered. And the Aramaic translation demonstrates the connection between the woman as an analogy for all of the nation of Babylon. So these verses can be summarized in the following way. So I kind of broke it down. And so in verse 1, the Targum emphasizes the downfall of Babylon, addressing it as the congregation of Babylon, right? And the kingdom of the Chaldeans, right? The imagery of sitting in the dust and lacking a throne of glory underscores the loss of power and prestige. The original Hebrew's reference to being tender and delicate is replaced with the idea that Babylon will no longer be called by such flattering terms. Okay, and then in verse 2, so we had verse 1 here. In verse 2, the Targum interprets the phrase, uncover the leg and pass through the rivers, metaphorically. It refers to receiving calamity, right, and going into servitude. And the glory of Babylon's kingdom is to be put away, and its princes are overthrown. The scattering of the people and their vanishing like waters of a river symbolize the disillusion of Babylon's military might. And in verse 3 here, the Targum vividly describes the exposure of Babylon's nakedness and shame. God's vengeance is pronounced, and the judgment upon Babylon will be altered. And the phrase from the children of men suggests a significant change in Babylon's fate. Okay, so in summary here, The Targum Jonathan translation emphasizes Babylon's downfall and loss of glory and impending judgment, and it conveys a powerful message about the consequences of pride and arrogance. These verses serve as a cautionary tale for all generations, right? So, these things that we should think about, not being like this, right? And now, the rabbis of the Talmud go on to interpret these things and draw out certain aspects about the text. They do so in the following way here. So let's look at what the rabbis say here. It says, along these lines, Rav Hista said, even a woman's exposed leg is considered nakedness, as it is stated, uncover the leg and pass through the rivers. And it is written in the following verse, your nakedness shall be revealed and your shame shall be seen. Shemuel further stated, a woman's singing voice is considered nakedness, which he derives from the phrase accorded a woman's voice, as it is stated, sweet is your voice and your countenance is alluring. And he quotes from the Song of Songs 2, verse 14. And similarly, Rav Sheshet stated, even a woman's hair is considered nakedness, for it too is praised, as it is written, your hair is like a flock of goats trailing down from Mount Gilead. And again, Song of Songs 4, verse 1. Okay, so the Talmudic commentary here on Isaiah 47, verses 2 through 3, is found in the Talmud Bavli in Berakhot 24a, provides a significant insight into the interpretation of the original verses. For example, Rab Hista says here, he says right here that he interprets the phrase uncovering the leg and passing through the rivers as referring to a woman's exposed legs. And he considers the partial exposure of nakedness as nakedness. Okay, and so the Talmudic commentary highlights the sensitivity towards modesty and the perception of what constitutes indecency, right? So Rav Hista's interpretation moves beyond the literal meaning of the verse. It underscores the importance of modesty and discretion in personal conduct. So this teaching encourages individuals today to be mindful of both appearance and behavior, especially in matters related to modesty and propriety. So this is in contrast to the woman described in Isaiah 47 and Revelation 17. Revelation 17, it says that she's a prostitute. So there is no modesty and there is no propriety, right? And the Talmud also emphasizes the non-physical aspects, such as the vocal expression or the hair, and as having an impact on modesty and perception, right? If you have coarse talking, right, how are you perceived? And we note how the New Testament text has the concepts related to modesty and self-control and honoring God through our actions that resonate throughout all of Scripture, okay, and here in Isaiah. And so this Talmudic commentary expands the understanding of nakedness in the verses from Isaiah, applying it not only to women's exposed body, but also to her voice and her hair. So these things encourage individuals to consider various aspects of their behavior, of their appearance, and the expressions, right, in light of societal norms and biblical values. And it demonstrates how the rabbis of the Talmud sought to interpret and apply biblical verses to their daily lives, and providing guidance on appropriate behavior and modesty. So doing so, they helped shape Jewish culture and tradition, emphasizing the importance of respect and dignity for both men and women. We note again how different this is from all the other world religions, right? We got laws regarding these things, having respect and personal dignity and having great value, right? We are so greatly valued by God, right? And the Talmudic commentary enriches our understanding of Isaiah's words, emphasizing the broader implications of modesty and the multifaceted nature of what constitutes nakedness. So let's continue to engage these timeless truths and apply them to our lives, right? Okay, so let's go on look at the Aramaic text here. And so I kind of broke down verses, because we're looking at verses 4 and 5 and 6. So we broke down verses 4, 5, and 6. And here in verse 4, it says, our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, is his name, the Holy One of Israel, in the Hebrew Bible, okay? And then Jonathan says, our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, his name is the Holy One of Israel. Okay, so they're very similar. The difference is in the text here is in the omission of the phrase is his name, which emphasizes the divine identity. So the Aramaic version maintains the core message of God as the Redeemer and the Holy One of Israel. Okay, so in verse 5, we see it says, sits in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called the mistress of kingdoms. And Jonathan says, sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called mistress. Did I accidentally duplicate that? Let me see here. What's that, verse 5? Called the mighty one of the kingdoms. Oh, maybe I didn't. Okay, so again, these. Oh, okay, so when we look here, and it says the mighty one of the kingdoms, okay? And then here, I accidentally duplicated that. Oops, made a mistake. But it is interesting is that if it says instead of mistress of the kingdoms, mighty ones of the kingdoms, this is how she perceived herself, right? And then in verse 6 here, it says, I was angry with my people. I have profaned my inheritance and given them into your hand. You showed them no mercy on the elderly. You laid your yoke very heavily. And then Jonathan says, you were angry with my people. You afflicted them without compassion. You did not spare the elderly. You oppressed them greatly. Okay, so there is a difference, slight difference here. And verse 6, the Targum shifts the focus from God's anger to Babylon's actions, right? And the translation emphasizes Babylon's lack of compassion and oppression of the elderly, okay, those who are helpless, right? And so the Aramaic version highlights the consequences of Babylon's cruelty. The Targum emphasizes the core reasons why God's judgment is coming upon the kingdom. And you note that the major emphasis here is on their cruelty, their lack of compassion. What do we see going on in the world today, right? We see all the universities with these demonstrations. There is cruelty. There is a lack of compassion. They won't let students go to campus to go to their classes, right? And so forth. And I've seen their fights break out and so forth. Anyway, so you can see how these things apply to our world today. They're timeless truths. And the Targum it's emphasizing Babylon's actions. It underscores the moral implications of cruelty and oppression. And these things function as a warning to us to not be cruel and to not be oppressive, right? And the Aramaic translation encourages reflection on how our actions affect others and the consequences of mistreating others. We also note the New Testament parallels that are found in these concepts that are derived from the Aramaic and the Hebrew Bibles. The concepts are related to God's justice and his mercy and his care for the vulnerable, and how God's people are to emulate these things because we are created B'Tselem Elohim, right, in the image of God. And so the Targum translation helps us to gain a broader understanding of the nuanced perspective on Babylon's downfall and the moral lessons that we draw from it. So let us learn from history and strive for compassion and justice in our own lives towards others. Okay. Now, next, let's look at a Midrash. So see what the Midrash has to say. So, the Midrash Tanchuma Buber on Tazria, Parashat Tazria, right? And so it says, another interpretation, when anyone has on the skin of his flesh a swelling or a sore or a bright spot, it becomes the plague of leprosy. The verse is speaking about 4 empires, okay? And the swelling represents Babylon, since it is stated, and you shall take up the song of scorn against the king of Babylon. The sore represents Media, okay, because Haman conspired with Ahasuerus to devastate, kill, and destroy. The bright spot represents the Greek Empire, okay? According to the parallel in Leviticus 11, the bright spot represents Greece because the empire lorded it over Israel and said, whosoever has an ox, let him ride on the horns of the ox, that he has no share in the God of Israel. And in the plague of leprosy represents the wicked empire of Edom, okay, and that in the rabbinic literature is Rome, because the Holy One afflicted it in its prince with leprosy, as stated. Why has Abireka been washed away? And see above, Exodus 3:19, and the note here, in the world to come, the Holy One shall sit in judgment over the wicked empire. He will say to them, why did you oppress my children? Okay, so again, you got the oppression, right? And they will say, it was you that acted when you delivered them into our hands. Then the Holy One will say to them, because, and it says, to paraphrase, and this is Isaiah 47:6, I delivered them into your hands. Did you not show them mercy? Instead, in Isaiah 47:6, upon the aged you made your yoke exceedingly heavy. And this aged one is Rabbi Akiva, who was present, and whom the empire oppressed, the empire which has no end. Okay, and Akiva was when the destruction of the temple, right, in 70 AD. So the Midrash Tanchuma Buber, in its interpretation on Leviticus 13 verse 2, draws this fascinating parallel between skin disease, the rise and fall of empires. And the Midrash identifies 4 empires which are represented by different skin conditions, and also connects Lashon Hara to the wicked empires in the following way. So let's look at these 4. Wait a minute. Right here. I was too far down. Okay. The 4 empires. Okay. And then Lashon Hara and the empires. Okay. So you got Babylon, you got the swelling as Babylon, the sore as Media, the bright spot as the Greek Empire, and the plague of leprosy as the wicked Edomite, right? And then the Midrash introduces the concept of Lashon Hara, which is negative speech in the context of these empires. And in the world to come, the Holy One will judge the wicked empire. The empire will be questioned about its oppression of God's children. The empire's response will be that God delivered them into their hands. However, God will counter that they failed to show mercy, right? Failed to show mercy, as it is stated in Isaiah 47:6. Okay, and in the aged one referred here to Rabbi Akiva, who suffered under the oppressive empire and seemed endless. Okay, so we note how Tazria, Tzaraat, is a disease that manifests itself on the outside of the body, right? It's a skin disease. And the rabbis say that Tzaraat is the result of sin that is within, that it becomes so great that it comes forth through the skin, right? And manifests itself as the leprosy, right? And so sin makes its way to the outside of the body. And the Midrash creatively weaves together historical events, biblical verses, and the concepts of Tzaraat and Lashon Hara to convey deeper meanings that underlie the wicked actions of foreign empires. So Lashon Hara serves as a reminder of the consequences of negative speech and the importance of compassion and mercy. So the Midrash connects various empires, Babylon and Media and Greece and Rome, Edom, right? And to these verses in Isaiah 47, verses 4-6, which describe the consequences of oppressing the weak and the elderly. So this means that there was mercilessness towards those who are supposed to be shown mercy, right? And the empires are seen as responsible for causing suffering and hardships for the people of Israel. So the Midrash emphasizes that the Holy One will judge these empires for their actions, asking them why they did not show mercy to the people of Israel, despite being delivered into their hands. So this interpretation highlights the importance of remembering how God is paying attention to how we treat others, whether with kindness and compassion, or as these nations did with uncaring hatred and the consequences of mistreating those who are vulnerable and keeping these things in their heart. For example, those who do these things, it's obvious because their behaviors are manifest for everyone to see, just as we see in the manifestation of Tzaraat, right? And so then last, let's look at the Aramaic text here, verses 7 and 8. Now, we note that the Masoretic text has the woman speaking and believing that she will be a woman forever, where the Aramaic translation uses the word malkuna, which means kingdom, and takifat, which means beauty or charm. And I didn't mark down where these where that was. Okay, so you got malkuna, right? And then you have takifat, right? Where's, okay, takifat, right here and right here. Okay, so the Targum uses the word beauty or charm, so changing the meaning to the kingdom of Babylon with its ideologies, believing that these things will remain forever. Okay, so we note how, according to the Aramaic Targum, those who live wickedly will pass away, and God's righteousness will last forever. Right? The Aramaic translation emphasizes the faithfulness of God and his delight in Israel, and the text portrays Israel as scattered and despised, yet destined for honor and recognition by kings and princes because of the glory of God. In addition, the use of the term Holy One underscores God's unique status as the Creator and Lord over all. And in summary, the Targum Jonathan enriches our understanding of Isaiah 47, verses 7 and 8, by emphasizing God's covenant and promises and the ultimate fulfillment of his redemptive plan. The Aramaic words used in the Targum provide a vivid picture of God's love and care for his people. And we note how this is the way that the scriptures function to influence us to seek the Lord, right? And so let's look at a couple more commentaries, like from Rashi and Steinsaltz also. They speak on this aspect in relation to the Isaiah text in their commentaries. So let's look at that. Rashi here, and he says, and you said to yourself, I will forever be a mistress, and no retribution shall come upon me. And this thing enticed you until you did not take to heart these blows that would come upon you, and you did not remember the end of your evil that you have done. And then Steinsaltz on verse 7 and 8, it says, you said forever I will be a mistress, a kingdom that reigns over others, okay? And until you did not take these words to heart, you did not remember it, God's punishments end, you disregarded the historical tendency for kingdoms to rise and fall. And now hear this delicate one who sits in security, who says in her heart, it is I, and there is none like me. Therefore, I will not sit as a widow, and I will not know bereavement. Like a noble woman who lives in the lap of luxury and feels that the entire world is under her control, right? Babylon, the capital city of an empire steeped in a rich heritage, held itself in great esteem, right? And so to speak, and was complacent, falsely assuming that no tragedy would befall it. Okay, so there in Rashi's commentary and Steinsaltz's commentary, there are a number of concepts that are presented that discuss things that entice and lead one away from the Lord. Sin is any action or thought that goes against God's standards for moral behavior and is rebellion against God's commands. Sin can indeed lead to people to believe that they will not suffer any consequences for their actions. And this is often the result of not taking God's word to heart and not recognizing the importance of obeying his commands. The consequences of sin are severe. And the Bible teaches that sin leads to spiritual death and separation from God. Romans 6:23 states, for the wages of sin is death. And this refers not only to physical death, but also to eternal separation from God. When people become complacent or arrogant, they lose sight of the fact that sin has both spiritual and temporal consequences, right? And living in luxury, being enticed by the world, can also contribute to sin. In addition, the Bible warns against the dangers of wealth and material possessions, as they can lead to a focus on self-indulgence and a lack of concern for others. The concept of luxury is relative to time and culture. What may be considered luxurious today might not have been in the past. And so when people become too comfortable in their lives, they may be more likely to ignore God's teachings and engage in sinful behavior. So these concepts are interconnected in the sense that they all relate to the human tendency to prioritize personal desires and comfort over obedience to God. And by not taking God's word to heart, people may become more susceptible to the temptations of the world and may be engaged in sinful behavior that may have negative consequences in both the spiritual and the temporal realms. So we note how there are some things to consider for a daily basis, on a daily basis, and so things to consider when evaluating luxuries, right? And so we got soul food, right? And does it contribute to the well-being of your soul and those around you, right? And then efficient. Is it efficient for life in ministry, right? Stewardship. Are we using our resources wisely? Responsible stewardship involves balancing needs, wants, and generosity. And then contentment. Are we content with what we have? Luxury becomes sinful when it leads to greed, discontentment, or neglect of others. And eternal perspective. Consider how our choices align with eternal values. Seek God's wisdom in balancing earthly comforts with heavenly priorities. Okay, so as a faithful people, we should view wealth and material possessions with a balanced perspective. While enjoying blessings, we are also called to practice stewardship and generosity, humility, and a focus on spiritual values. Now, in the Bible, these ideas are often presented in contrast to the importance of humility and obedience and faithfulness. And again, the idea is that what Isaiah is presenting to us is meant for us to be mindful in our hearts by focusing on these virtues of God for the purpose of guarding against the temptations of sin and maintaining a closer relationship with God. Seek wisdom, cultivate contentment, and use resources for God's glory and well-being of others. That's why Yeshua said, store up treasures in heaven, right? And that's what that means. So these are the things that God wants for our lives, according to his word, right? According to the scriptures. Okay, so that's what I had for the commentary on Isaiah 47, verses 1 through 8. So come next week, and we will go through the remainder of chapter 47. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.